Welcome to Why I Quit, a show that interviews people quitting their 9-to-5 jobs in search of something different. Listen to inspiring conversations where we dive deep into the stories of why people quit their jobs, what were the hardest parts, where are they now, and any advice for people following the same path. I am so excited to introduce Lauren Elsasser Smith as this week's guest on Why I Quit. Listen to Lauren discuss starting 2 successful businesses, rising the corporate ranks at Burger King, and most recently to quitting her full-time job to follow one of her passions of teaching at her alma mater, Susquehanna University. Learn why she decided to leave Burger King, how it was affecting her and her family, how she prepared to quit, and what it led to. Hey, Lauren, thanks so much for joining me today.
Of course, I'm so excited to be here.
I wanted to go back a little bit at Susquehanna University when you were studying. I know you were doing a combination of school and also running a business at the same time. So can you give me a brief background and intro into that?
Yeah, for sure. So when I was a senior in high school, I decided to just start sort of baking for fun and wrote a little bit about on the blog that I created. I came up with some really cringy name like Miss Cupcake, thought it would be evergreen, and then started sort of like selling my things backhanded in a way. I look back now and I look at like photos that I took and products that I made and things that I said like on the internet, and I'm like incredibly uncomfortable by them. But I think it was Reid Huffman from LinkedIn that was like, if you're not completely embarrassed by like the last iteration that you did, like you didn't start soon enough. And so that was definitely a learning experience for me. But when I went into college, there were people there that were like completely invested in my success and challenged me to think about what was next. And so I had classes where I got to use my business as sort of like the guinea pig of projects, and professors that were really excited about that and classmates that were like, sure, whatever. And so while I was in college, I was able to purchase a food truck and start like setting up at festivals and fairs. But I had all this like free consulting back at Susquehanna, but it was challenging while other people were like partying and living it up and just being really chill. I was going from classes like 9 to 5 or studying 9 to 5. And then I would drive to my bakery and sometimes be there till like 2, 3 a.m. But it definitely taught me just like excitement of starting something new. I know we've talked in the past about like there not being a rule book for that. And especially being so young, people weren't always expecting that from me. And so it was really exciting to just do it and make big mistakes, learn from them, and then sort of be better for it in the end.
So when you're at this point in college, do you think that, you know, the food truck or just running your own business is your path forward in the future? Or do you think that you're potentially going to be going into a job after school?
I think that I knew that this was in me. I knew that like the control piece of it and the creative freedom was something that had to be a part of my life forever. But I always was like, once I graduate, I'm going to get a job. I never thought like this would be full time. I think partly because I'm definitely a person who seeks out security. And so for me, like launching this thing full time was very much a giving up control, giving up a safety net of funding in a way. I didn't really know what to expect. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And so I've seen like the ebb and flow, the highs and the lows of what entrepreneurialism can be and what it unfortunately can lack. But I was super like into like the high that comes with like doing something on your own and being recognized for that, something that was really exciting. But I never thought, okay, I'm going to take this full time. The bakery business is really cutthroat. And when you're selling an item that's like $3 or $4, you have to sell a shit ton of them to make any money at all. And what I realized is I wasn't tracking figures. I didn't know what my cost of goods was. When something in an industry where cost of goods should be like 25%, I think mine was probably like 40 because I would go to the grocery store in between classes and buy things that were not necessarily cost sound. So when I looked at my books at some of the years, I was just like, I did not make a lot of money doing that. So I either need to completely turn this on its side and figure out how to monetize it better, or I need to sort of move on and think of the next venture that I can still be in control and still be creative, but not necessarily, you know, just do it for nothing.
And so where does that go from there? After graduation, what do the next steps look like for you?
So I had taken a job with a startup in New York City called Birchbox. It's a makeup subscription company that was actually just recently purchased by a pharmaceutical company, which is really interesting. And I thought, wow, okay, I'm going to learn. I've learned what it's like to be at the very beginning of a business, like starting it, like writing the rule book, like writing employee descriptions or job descriptions. Now I want to be at sort of the middle of the game of they have funding. It's a small company, but it is growing. I'm still going to be a part of those like formative processes, but I just want to see what it looks like and see if I was ever in a position to receive massive amounts of funding, what that journey would look like. And so this has a point to the food truck. I kept running the food truck. I hired a manager. And so that manager would go to festivals and fairs while I was in New York City, and I would come back and sometimes take like weeks off work and run them. So I was still like the face of the brand that I'd created. And I realized that that was incredibly taxing because I was taking all my vacation to work. Realized not necessarily sustainable, but for sure interesting. But I sort of became burnt out from the startup life, from the very startup that I created. And I got married to my husband, who went to Susquehanna. And he told me that this sort of throughout his journey at college, was interested in pursuing medicine. And so when Jared got accepted to med school, I had the business and we were sort of a crossroads. Like, I don't think this old ass truck is going to make the drive from central Pennsylvania to Lynchburg, Virginia, where we were now going to live. I don't have the connections. I don't have the community. I couldn't take it with me. And at this point I was sort of burnt out, loved the journey, but I had evolved from the brand. The brand was called Miss Cupcake and Let's Make Whoopie. And so it was like very quirky and fun and childish. And that was great. But I had sort of moved on and I realized that it would have been really laborious to take that brand and change it into something else. And so I was like, you know what? I've learned about exit plans. Let's see if I can sell this and turn to the next thing. And so I had met with a few buyers who just like were not good fits, who just didn't really embody the personality or wasn't willing to step in. And I needed it to be true to what it was in my own mind, which is really silly now, but I'm quite glad that I went through that vetting process, found an excellent buyer, sold the business, and then used most of the proceeds from that business to fully outfit my next venture, which don't know how I decided on this, but I was like, wedding photography. That's amazing. I loved the wedding industry because I'd been a part of it with my bakery business. But what I felt like I was lacking was not actually being able to see the bride, to see the groom, to be a part of the excitement of the day. I dropped off the stuff that they ordered, baked goods, and I left. And so I loved taking photos. There was sort of an opening and a gap in the market in both Central PA and Lynchburg, Virginia for like the type of photography that I thought I would do, which is hilarious because I hadn't done photography. And I decided to like buy all this fancy equipment that I knew like the industry, like the average individual in the industry had. And I bought it, went to a bunch of workshops and started shooting weddings. So that's sort of from one to the other, completely different, but a really, really interesting journey, I would say.
Were you still at Birchbox at this time, or had you already left at this point?
So I had left Birchbox right before we got married, and I started working for my dad in his family business, just sort of strategizing what was next, realizing that accounting wasn't really a great fit for me, but understanding like the inner workings of family business was interesting. So when we moved to Virginia, I was recruited then by Burger King Corporation to join their operations team. They really liked the startup bakery background. They liked the startup background from Birchbox, and they were like, we can teach you everything you need to know about operations at a sort of like really massive scale. I joined the Burger King team in operations in 2016, I think, and was there for about 3.5 years, but that was like on the opposite end. So I got to see the very beginning, the middle of a startup, and then sort of like what happens when you're at that, like a different stage, when you're really massive, you've franchised, you've grown into this huge brand. And I loved my time there. It was incredibly exhausting. We worked a ton, but I jumped from operations then into their training department and then into marketing when I finally then stepped away. But all of this time, I was running businesses on the side. And so my vow while Jared was in medical school was, I just need to be 15 minutes busier. I just need to be 15 minutes busier, because if not, I would just sit there and like twiddle my thumbs and be angry that he was studying, which not helpful when you're studying to get a doctorate. And so I would go to work Monday through Friday. I would then on the weekends go shoot a wedding in Pennsylvania, usually because that's where my clientele was. And I would travel back. And all of the while I was actually also trying to get my master's degree as well, because my intention at some point was always to teach. I just didn't know the timeline. And so I kept myself incredibly, incredibly busy, especially during those years of medical school, so that I didn't have to be bored.
Is that tough for you, balancing a full-time job on top of like running businesses? It seems like from the beginning, this is what you were like in college. This is like what you were like with every job. But is that difficult for you, or are you just like love the work and it's something you enjoy?
When I was married to someone who was incredibly busy, I didn't have a kid. I wasn't around family. It was fine. That's who I was. I was the person that always had a packed schedule. And like, I didn't really have a social life, and that was fine. Sometimes I did, but it was like late at night, like after work, after business. Weekends were full of weddings. And so it was fine then. It was actually no problem. And I could balance everything really, really well. Didn't have to prioritize. Could spend hours like dwindling on something to make it perfect because I had the time then.
What's your experience like in the typical 9 to 5? Like, how does that kind of like fit in with your style of work and your personality?
So I realized very quickly, especially when I was working with my dad, his family business accounting, that I hated the typical 9 to 5. I'd had micromanagers in the past that would sort of like oversee my every move, and I just couldn't live that life. And so what was great about Burger King is the entire time I was there, I was remote. And so I was like doing remote work before it was like cool. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, 2020 is the year of sweatpants and like just putting a shirt on top. I was like, that is old news. So I lived in my territory, and then I would basically work from home and then travel out. But my hours were my hours. So if I like wanted to sleep in one day and just work till 9 p.m., I could do that then, because my schedule was so flexible. And so I had learned like pretty early on that if I were to work in a corporate setting, it had to sort of be on my own terms. I had to be able to like go to the gym if I wanted to, or like didn't want to, or like have an appointment in the middle of the day without texting someone or emailing someone that I was doing that. Because what I learned about my personality is that even though sometimes I loved structure, I really liked control. I really liked autonomy. And Burger King enabled me to do that, especially toward the beginning of my role in operations, where I had a territory and I had to learn how to manage it based on the relationships, based on the personalities in that territory. Well, and no one else knew that territory better than me. And so there was a lot of autonomy and respect in like doing my own thing that I really appreciated. The 9 to 5 culture wasn't a problem because I could sort of create what I wanted.
And so as you're getting towards the end of the 3.5 years there, what is going on in your head in terms of thinking about quitting? You're thinking about what's next. What's going on at that point?
I feel like if you had watched this interview up until this point, it'd be like, wait, isn't this called Why I Quit? Like, doesn't she like love this life and like super flexible? Yeah, up until then, I was like, this is fine. I mean, I can do this. I can run on empty forever and not feel like I'm on empty because my personality allows it. My schedule allows it. My husband's busy. I didn't know anything else. I switched to, well, actually, we found out we were pregnant while I was in operations, which was a pleasant surprise to us and the best thing that's ever happened to us. I remember we were developing this brand new team called Burger King University. So excited because this was my dream. This was interlocking education and corporate like experience. And I was welcome to join that team and basically develop this university and help launch it and travel. And it was my dream. If you could have had me paint a picture of my perfect job, it was this. And so I felt really lucky, but it also required me to be away for weeks at a time, especially training, and I was pregnant, but again, I was like, oh, working mom, this is fine. I'm pregnant. She comes with me. She's super easy to take care of right now. So I took maternity leave. I came back and I was like, wow, my world has completely turned upside down. I have to learn to prioritize things differently. I have to be efficient. I cannot work this much. I just cannot do it. But I knew I needed to work. And so I actually then transferred to another team in marketing and worked from home primarily. And I realized toward the end of that role that I could not be on demand from my work. I could not work, these really, really long weeks, even though I really desired it. I had people that were vying for me and fighting for me. And ultimately, about 6 months before that happened, I remember looking at Jared and being like, I can't do this. Like, I want to, but I can't do this. And it felt like an incredible failure because my entire life has been propping up all the things that I can juggle and showing the world, look at me. And I think it was incredibly humbling because I realized that I couldn't do all of these things and prioritize being a wife and prioritize being a good mom and also be a really good employee. And so about 6 months before, we decided to come up with this very logical strategic plan of like, let's pull up an Excel document and figure out our budget if my income didn't exist. Now, this was really challenging because if anyone that has gone to medical school or any sort of elongated school knows that while you're in school, you are not paid. You pay. And so the thought of this was incredibly insane because Jared didn't have an income. I was the sole provider of our household, and I knew I couldn't. I knew I just couldn't suck it up and do it because I had already sort of like compromised my parenting and my wifing because of the role that I chose that I was in. And it was fine for me before I had Virginia and before Jared, was working and studying all the time. So Excel document it was. I had to think about it super logically because I'm a very emotional person. And so when I look at things that are logical and sort of objective, I can figure out a process to make that happen without letting emotions like get in the way. It's like the same with remodeling a home. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at that tile. It's so beautiful. It's 3 times our budget for tile, but it's so beautiful. Can you imagine? And then I go back to the budget and say, if I do this stupid tile, I have to sacrifice something else that I won't want to. So it was the exact same way. And we figured out even like down to insurance because I carried insurance. I mean, Jared carried nothing because he was in school. And so, we looked at all of the medical sharing programs that I before had thought were like ridiculous and chose one. And thank the Lord we had no major medical expenses, but it had to be logical. I think what's crazy is I didn't know what was next. I was in a place where I just knew that there was one thing in my life that I had to remove. I couldn't even think about putting another thing there. And so part of that 6-month planning process was creating a buffer for 6 months for me to figure it out. I think that was really healthy because what I found was that 6 month on the dot, I had the next opportunity and we had saved and just been really ruthless with our cutting down our expenses during those 6 months of savings so that I didn't have to feel guilty about taking that time to just think about what was next after quitting.
And at that point, when you officially make that leap, how nervous are you compared with your confidence in terms of you're going to find that next thing? Well,
I am by nature a people pleaser. And I had incredible bosses, incredible mentors at Burger King that had basically advocated for me since my birth at the company. And so in the back of my head, I'm like, I know I need to do this. No offense, but I know I need to do this for who I am as a human at this time of my life. This corporate life just right now isn't working and I just need to move on. I didn't care about leaving the company. I cared about leaving my manager. And, people talk about when they leave companies, they don't really leave the company. They leave who they worked for. And that can be really horribly difficult if that person you worked for advocated for you and loved you and cared for you and like really took time to invest in you. And that was my situation. And so I was leaving her. You know, when you remember all of those like formidable events in your life, like where you were sitting, like what you had for breakfast that day. I remember sitting in my car ready to call and like shaking because I had stayed actually a bit longer than I had expected because I was afraid. I was just afraid to let her down. And ultimately, you know, she was supportive, frustrated because that meant she had to figure out what was going on. But to me, it was like very supportive and very understanding. And so ultimately it was what it was. And I think what I've learned about corporate America in general, or work in general, is that even though you want to think that you're like this super special superstar, like you are replaceable. And I think that's really helpful and freeing for anyone going through this, is like, just know that when you leave, like someone else is going to do it. Someone else is going to step in and someone else is going to take over, and it's going to be fine, and the company is going to be fine, and your managers are going to be fine. And that ultimately, like, me making a decision for myself and my family was the best thing that I could have possibly done. And I wish I would have taken some of that anxiety away. And I feel like now, because I've actually quit, 2 times, I have a lot more confidence in myself and what's best for me. And I also think that I wouldn't say yes to things now that I did then because I was afraid.
How are you thinking about like what you're looking for next? Like, are you focused on a job that kind of like fits into the priorities of the lifestyle that you're looking for? Or what does that look like for you?
I thought I would do one of 2 things. Actually, I thought I would do one of 3 things. Well, actually 2 things, because I didn't think the third thing was an option, which is ultimately what happened. The first thing was, I'm going back into corporate America. I just need to rest. Like, I can do this. I can get over it. I'm probably going to go back to Burger King. Like, in my mind, I'm going back to Burger King because I knew that they would welcome me back. Like, I knew this role really, really well. And the role that I was in stayed open for a while because I tracked it and I stayed in touch with people because I couldn't let go fully. I thought that was going to happen. I actually like had conversations about it happening. The second thing I thought would happen was I would find an idea and I would go like just totally in. And because it was something that I designed and desired, like I wouldn't care about the lifestyle. So it really wasn't like I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom, because that's just not who I am. I like bow down to women that have the patience and the understanding and the grace that comes with being a stay-at-home mom, but that's just not my personality. I never toyed with that. I didn't really toy with going back to school because at this point I had my master's. I didn't know what else I would go for. I wasn't looking into like getting into medicine or law or anything. I wasn't looking to just rest. I really thought I would go back into something incredibly, overwhelmingly corporate or startup life, which both are not necessarily like flexible with being a mother.
And so, at that 6-month point, what is this next opportunity that comes up?
Jared and I matched for residency. So it's like med school 4 years and then residency 3 years and then sometimes more depending on what you're doing, because medical school is just like a 63-year long journey. We had decided to move back to Lynchburg, Virginia. I mean, that's where we matched. And so we moved back. And I remember 2 weeks into moving back to Virginia, I get a call from my now boss at Susquehanna University who said, "Hey, we have a 1-year contract opportunity for you to come to Susquehanna and teach full time." And I was like, first of all, if we circle back, it's an offer that I had discussed with Dr. Fleck before. And it was something I never could do because I was in this corporate setting. It was a dream and I couldn't say yes, which is to me now, it's like, oh, sweet Lauren, like if I could only just shake you a little bit and tell you like, it's okay to let go. It's okay to let go, to do things that you've always dreamed of in the name of not having that security. I had gotten my master's degree thinking like at some point I would teach, knowing that it might require a PhD. And so I was like, wow, this is amazing. What an incredible dream opportunity. I live in Lynchburg, Virginia. this was like in the thick of the pandemic, and everything was sort of upside down. And I talked to my husband about it, and we decided, just gonna do it. I'm just going to be a commuter from Lynchburg, Virginia. And it was an incredibly difficult year of our life, but it was a dream. And I'm still at Susquehanna 2 years later, well, a year later, year and a half later. So that 1-year contract obviously unfolded into more, which has been amazing. And I have a work-life balance that is incredibly manageable. And I'm able now, while I teach entrepreneurship and while I teach management and while I teach marketing, to have time to dig into like the next creative venture, which I never knew that my work and like my creative interest could merge together and create synergy that could actually benefit my students and benefit like that part of me that needs to be fulfilled. And so, gosh, a really, really rewarding, incredible experience. And through it all, Jared was able to actually transfer back to a residency in Pennsylvania, which is pretty unprecedented, and we didn't expect it to happen, but it has. And so we've been incredibly grateful for everything that seemed to be out of place and the timing to be maybe off. We always say that we make the right choices at the wrong time. Our life is just like a collection of making the right choices at the wrong time. Somehow all of those choices have lined up, and it's been really rewarding after a season that was quite difficult.
You know, a lot of the listeners on the show have just recently quit their jobs or thinking of quitting their jobs. Like, looking back with your experiences of quitting twice, starting your own businesses, what are some like pieces of advice you wish you knew as you were going through those processes at the time?
I think the beauty of life is it's sort of a platform for making these mistakes. And I don't know if like going back, me knowing any of these things would have changed my decisions. Like, I literally had to live through them. And so I think for your listeners and me as a consumer of the show as well, just hearing other people's experience, I think normalizes this behavior. Like, no one is talking about quitting. Everyone's talking about getting a job. And I think, you guys saw like a gap in the market and we're like, let's start talking about this because you've been through it. All of your listeners are either thinking about going through it or just like want to know what the glamour is of quitting. And it is hard. It will never not be hard. Even if you hate your job, it's still hard to do. It's hard to reinvent yourself. It's hard to plan and save. It is hard, but it's a thing that we do. Like, we all go through hard things. And I think just allowing yourself to think beyond your current work situation is so freeing and so healthy. I would say the best advice that I can give is treating it like a logical decision and not letting emotions get in the way of you. Because when the first time I quit at Birchbox, I was just super emotional. I was young. I didn't allow myself to like really think about what quitting meant. I didn't plan. And then I entered a role that I really wasn't excited about because I needed cash to live and to pay for things like sewer and water, which as a child, I ignorantly lived unaware that you have to pay for these things. And so be logical. Like, allow yourself to, even if you're not like a numbers person, to just plot it out. See what you need to save. Give yourself some flexibility. If you're not completely aware of what you want to do next, which I think a lot of your listeners probably have like an idea, right, that they've just been like working late at night for, or that they've been dreaming about. But I think also what is encouraging is that I didn't have one of those. Like, I went through these periods of life where like my entrepreneurial ventures really took me out of my work and created, I think, a dizziness in my full-time job, but it was never like, I'm going to leave to pursue this. I had no idea. And I still was able to sort of find my way based on relationships and decisions that I had made in the past and preparing for whatever it was. But I have no idea what I want to be when I grow up. And that was always something that caused me a lot of stress when I was younger. Even watching my husband, who from like a young age of like 18 or 19, which who the heck are we when we're that young, knew like he wanted to be a doctor, and watching that and being so confused that I didn't have that. I didn't have this desire to like be one thing forever. and to just take some of that pressure off of myself and listeners, to take some of that pressure off of yourself of like, it's okay if you don't have it all figured out. Like, I thought I would when I was 30, and I'm 30 and I don't, and I'm still able to enjoy life and just really exist in the moment and be the best that I possibly can be, what I'm doing right now, and find fulfillment in that. I think just give yourselves a bit of a break is my biggest advice when considering quitting and when not knowing what's next, but knowing that this thing that you're existing in right now can't be the long-term plan.
To end it, I'm curious, I know you're always working on a million different projects, but what are you most excited about that you're working on right now?
My husband and I bought a dilapidated A-frame cabin, and I have dreams of like micro elopements and an Airbnb, but we are going to live in it for a few years and sort of like test the waters. It's in the middle of nowhere. Everyone thinks that we're absolutely insane, which is a place that I like to exist in. So we'll see what's next, but I'd love to get into the hospitality industry. It's something that I have a huge heart for personally, and I'm always thinking about ways that I can sort of surprise and delight, which has sort of been a theme with all of my ventures, are like taking things that really don't matter and making them incredibly extraordinary, or that are super common, and trying to see them in a new light to bring like a little bit of glamour and excitement. So we'll see, but yeah, it's exciting for sure.
Thank you for listening. It really means a lot to us. We want to hear from you as we keep growing. Please reach out on whyiquit.co with any feedback, or if you have any guests that you think would be a good fit. Subscribe on whyiquit.substack.com to get an update every Wednesday with the newest guest. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube to get notified with the latest episodes. Also, a special thanks to Chris Dole for the music. Check out his newest album, Here's to You. Thank you, and we will be back next Wednesday.